Happy fifth Sunday of Lent. Happy Passiontide. Thank you so much. For those of you who were able to be at the Simple Soup Suppers over the last few weeks, Father Matt Deptula made a comment early on about John, the Gospel of John's role in the four Gospels. So we think of that the church came out of the Scriptures, which is not true. Jesus founded the church, and the church existed, and then within time, the church chose to write down their testimonies. And so the Scriptures actually come out of the church and her practice. And he referenced that John is written years, even decades after the other three Gospels, and he's writing it as if you've already read the other three Gospels. We actually see a reference to this today. So this is John chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. We read an entire chapter today. And it says, Now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. We have not heard in John's Gospel of anything about Martha, Mary, and Lazarus yet. In John's Gospel. And it continues on. Mary was the one who had anointed the Lord and with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. Again, this hasn't happened yet in John's Gospel. So John is expecting that anyone who's hearing this has already heard these things in a previous Gospel. We also hear the shortest sentence in all of Scripture. It says, and Jesus wept. Right? Jesus weeps at the death of this friend of his. Right? This friendship that John is expecting that we already know about. This weekend we're very blessed that we have baptisms at almost all of our weekend masses. All of them but this one. But at all the masses we have a baptism at. And actually, every year, if you have people who are coming into the church at the Easter Vigil, it is an option to read this gospel on the fifth Sunday of Lent for those who are preparing themselves for baptism. So it's kind of a cool thing that just naturally played out. Nowhere in here that I can think of at least does Jesus do anything with water. And nowhere in here is there anything reference of a baptism. But nonetheless, the church still gives the option that every year you can read year A's gospel if you have people who are preparing themselves to be baptized. Every time that we hear of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, almost always it's said in that order. Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Sometimes it'll be Mary, then Martha, but Lazarus is always last. In the first century, unless there was some good reason, they would have never done that naturally. Lazarus would have always been first. The man would have always been first. We know that they're siblings, so even more, regardless of Lazarus' age in comparison to his sisters, he still would have been referenced first over his sisters. The church has made, some commentators have made some suggestions as to why that might be the case. So this is just some faithful commentaries making an educated guess. It's not from the deposit of faith or anything like that. So we hear of Lazarus' name twice, and oftentimes we think of them as two different people. Just from my little bit of research, it doesn't sound like Lazarus was a super common name, but it wasn't like an uncommon name. But we hear the name twice in the Scriptures. One in today's Gospel and in this reference of these with these sisters, but also Lazarus, who's the poor man at the foot of the rich man, who gets stepped over, and both of them eventually die. And the rich man wants to go and tell his brothers to reform their life. And so people will assume that it's two different people, but again, some commentators, not from the deposit of faith, but some commentators think actually it's the same person. And it's bound up in why his name is listed last when they talk of the three. There's a possibility that Lazarus was somehow mentally disabled or mentally ill or something like that. And so Martha and Mary really were the head of that household, caring for their brother. We believe that Martha, Mary, and Lazarus are not without means. They somehow, we don't know exactly how, but that they're not hurting for money. One of the reasons is the reference that makes today, that they anoint the Lord with perfumed oil. It tells us in that gospel that I think it's actually the next chapter, how much that oil costs, and translated to today's currency, it would be like $40,000. So Martha, Mary, and Lazarus have such means that they are able to just dump this whole oil thing on someone's feet, worth so much money, and almost unworried about what the consequence of that would be. So Jesus actually meets Martha, Mary, and Lazarus in Luke's gospel. Again, John is assuming that we've read this already, but meets them for the first time, becomes very close friends with them, and now regularly will travel to visit with them. And in fact, he weeps, he's sad, his heart is moved when his friend dies. So again, this is the gospel that would be read at every year for those who are coming into the church and ultimately preparing themselves for baptism. At baptism, right, we're unwrapped from the contagion of original sin and allowed to live freely. We experience a type of the resurrection. And one of the cool things of doing baptisms during Mass, obviously it's an option. You can do baptisms during Mass or do them outside of Mass. And most of our baptisms are done during Mass. One of the cool things of that is the whole community gets to be a part of it. The person who's baptized immediately gets to meet their whole spiritual family. On Friday night, we hosted a speaker, Jill, and I guess I've been saying her name wrong this whole time, so I'm going to just call her Jill S. Jill S. Came and spoke to the women of the parish, those who were able to join us, and talked about the feminine identity. But I don't think anything she said really couldn't also be applied to men, but she came specifically to talk to women. That's her kind of passion, is to talk to women, which is awesome. And in all of, she actually had a chance of becoming, I don't know, famous, but to be an actress for her life, and stepped away from that eventually to do what she's doing. And she talked of being bound up in what others think of her, and what she thought others were thinking of her. She judged herself on that. All of us see ourselves a certain way. And almost all of that is bound up in how we think others are seeing us. Again, this is just my read of the situation. I could be totally wrong in this, but at whatever age a girl will begin to go through puberty, she'll begin to notice what every other girl is wearing and judge herself on it. She'll notice what women look like in magazines differently when that stage begins. Guys who try to act like that doesn't happen to them will begin to notice, oh, that guy's got bigger biceps than I do. And he'll begin to judge himself off of how big his biceps are. Off a guy in a magazine who's for sure taking steroids, he'll begin to judge his own biceps and see himself as more or less of a man based on what he sees others. It's a natural thing that all of us find part of our identity by those we're surrounded with, by those who are our friends. And our friends will either help us to become unbound by burial cloths, or they will bind us and burial cloths. Why is it that this would be the gospel that would be read for those preparing themselves to be baptized, and why it's such a cool thing that 2 babies will be baptized this weekend, or one that already has and one will be on this Sunday? Right? Those families are making a very bold claim that they want their child to identify themselves with God. And they want to find their identity in God. And they're choosing our community to help reinforce that in them. For us to be that community, though, that wants to reinforce it's necessary for us to reinforce in them that they are loved by God, cherished by God, they have dignity and respect, they're made for a purpose, they're not a loser, they're good. We have to believe that too, about ourselves. Right? Jesus weeps at the death of his friend Lazarus. Jesus weeps at the spiritual death in each one of us every time we see ourselves less than we actually are. And so Jesus very boldly says to Lazarus, but he says it to you and I, to come out of that death, to be resurrected. When the people ask for food, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. When the people are looking to see, he says, I am the light. When they want to know the way to heaven, he says, I am the narrow way. When we want to have true resurrection, Jesus says, I am the resurrection. As we're preparing ourselves for the final 2 weeks of the Lenten season, we're in Passion Tide. That's why we veil the statues. Right? To remind ourselves that we are to be saints also. At some point, it should be the case that any one of us could be cast as a statue and placed in a church because we've lived a heroic life. If I don't believe that about myself, I'll never fulfill it. Jesus died on the cross because he loves you and I. He wept for you and I. Jesus does not die for a loser. Jesus does not die for someone who's not worth it. Be unbound by the shackles of a false identity that the world puts on us. Be unbound by burial cloths that keep us from life. Right? Be unbound. Know that God loves you on these final 2 weeks, especially as we go into an all-day of confession this Wednesday. Be unbound. God does not see you for the sins, as that God does not see you for your past. He sees you only as a beloved child of his. Jesus says, I am the resurrection. I pray that you experience resurrection here today.